with us here on the C Morning Show. Now, you may or may not know that September is actually observed as World Suicide Prevention Month. Now, suicide has become a serious public health crisis, claiming nearly 1 million lives every year, which is approximately every 40 seconds.
So this issue is really real and very important, definitely. And there's many viral videos, including this one showing rock legend Bon Jovi saving a life.
In this video that we are seeing, John Bon Jovi and another woman helped a distressed woman on a pedestrian bridge in Nashville, comforting her while she was standing on the ledge and walking with her once she climbed back over.
And it is important to remember that this matter is happening around the world, including right here in Indonesia. We've seen many tragic cases, and one of which is a family of 4 who took their own lives due to their personal struggles.
Now, fortunately for that woman and everyone else involved, that footage ended well, but it was still heartbreaking to see. And we have to be aware that pain isn't always obvious for us to see. We have to see the signs because suicide can also be preventable. So to get a broader understanding and adding more awareness regarding suicide prevention, joining us this morning is psychiatrist who is also the Indonesian National Representative at the International Association for Suicide Prevention, Dr. Sandersan Onie. Good morning, Dr. Sandy. Thank you for being with us today.
No worries. Thanks for having me today.
It is a holiday, so
it is a Monday.
Getting you here on a day off, but nevertheless, this is obviously a problem that we have seen more and more of, especially with social media. And not to mention that social media may even be the cause of some of these incidences. So let's talk about warning signs first. What are some of the warning signs that of suicidal tendencies that one can be aware of and pay attention to, just as those perhaps immediately surrounding us to start?
Absolutely. So there are some obvious warning signs. So if a person is distressed, if a person starts talking about death, if a person starts posting things on their social media that
dark.
Dark things, something may not be right. Especially if you're close to someone and they start asking, well, what would the world be like if I'm gone? So these are clear and obvious warning signs.
Right.
Now, people who display these warning signs will not always ending up attempting suicide. But these are signs that we need to go, okay, something might be up. We need to ask them how they're doing. We might need to check up on them and talk to them. However, we do also have to recognize that there are some cases where there are just no signs at all.
Right. It was like a sudden.
Exactly. And that's why in a lot of cases where we can identify these signs, it's important for us to do so.
Right.
But in other cases, that's why it's really, really important for always to keep watch. Even though there may not be signs, you can always ask them how they're doing. We might be able to prompt them. There's nothing sadder than talking to someone who's been bereaved by suicide and them saying, I never knew.
Yeah.
You bring up an interesting point. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a commercial for suicide awareness, and it was 2 football fans. And it was a close-up of these 2 football fans arriving at the same game and it takes place over time. And they keep showing these 2 snapshots. One of them was really happy all the time, and I kept asking the other guy how he was doing. The other guy just kind of this flat expression. And over time, you realize at the end, 1 seat was missing at the very end, and it was actually the happy guy. And then he was saying that it should have been people should have been asking him, and that was what was missing.
Yeah.
Exactly right. We need to recognize that suicide is something that can happen to anyone, especially in our culture where we are excellent at putting on masks.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We're so good at pretending everything's okay. And it might be the very people that we feel don't need help. It might be the very people that we feel they're doing fine, they've got their life together, but it's always important to check up on our friends. Why? Because if people who we see that they've got everything together, we don't think they're at risk of suicide, then we would never have celebrity suicides.
Yes.
We wouldn't have Robin Williams.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have Chester Bennington.
Right. Robin Williams, I think, is one of the cases that is just, it blew everyone's mind because he was always this comedian that makes us very happy. And you know what? It says that, sometimes a clown really can have that poker face that kind of like, we can't really see what is going to happen in their lives. Now, Dr. Sandy, in regards to this, though, throughout the cases that you have treated before, can you take us through, like, of one of which these cases, why does this person, let's say, went through, or this would be the last option for them, and why would they want to have this last option?
Absolutely. So I just want to clarify a little bit that I'm not a practicing psychiatrist. In fact, my main focus is on research, and that's what I do. Okay. And we try to understand why, as you ask, why do people think about suicide?
Yeah.
I'm going to be really honest and say, we don't know. Our ability to predict whether a person who has had suicidal thoughts actually ends up attempting suicide, our ability to predict that hasn't improved in the past 60 years.
Okay.
With all the research across the globe. It's interesting because we have people who are the most distressed that we've ever seen, and they never think of suicide.
Yeah.
And yet I've seen and managed cases personally where a person could actually attempt suicide suddenly because their phone broke.
Wow.
Exactly. And so that's why it's so important that we understand there's no single cause.
Right.
There's no single thing. We don't know whether what we know could be the last feather that breaks the camel's back, the last straw that breaks the camel's back. But until today, we actually still don't know why people go from suicidal thinking to an attempt.
To taking that last. You know, Caroline brought up an interesting point earlier. We were talking about this prior to going on air. And she said, I wonder if there's people, how many people have actually attempted suicide and then kind of regretted it during the process. And I said, you know, ironically, we would never know because, and I guess this is what hampers research so much, is because a lot of times in a lot of these cases, you won't get to ask the victims what it is that was going through their thought process during those final steps.
Absolutely. That, and we need to make sure whenever we're doing suicide research is we're maintaining the confidentiality and the safety of the clients and the participants that we're working with as well. Asking them to recall probably one of the most harrowing moments of their life isn't always ethical.
It's traumatic.
Exactly, and that's why we want to make sure we don't re-traumatize them. But that being said, there are a lot of people who've come out of an attempt. I'll admit, so I've had really serious suicidal thoughts myself. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder.
Okay.
And I can honestly say I'm one of the people that I'm really glad that I'm here today. Because what happens when you are in a state of crisis, your vision narrows, your cognition narrows, and you focus on only two things.
Tunnel vision.
Exactly, that this is my problem, and I don't want to live in a state of suffering. I don't want to die, but I don't want to live either.
Right.
And that suicide is a way out. And so that's all you can focus on. You can't think of any other options. So it feels like you're going through a tunnel and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But I can honestly be here today, and I think this is for people out there who might be thinking of ending your life as well, that it can and does get better.
Right. And it is an uncomfortable topic to discuss, but again, we do need to look for these signs sometimes. So what happens when you do see some warning signs to someone that's close to you, a friend, a loved one, and then how do you approach this? Because a lot of times somebody who has tunnel vision is unlikely to want outside help. What's the best way to approach it, and what to do if they reject the notion that we consider they might need help?
Absolutely. So you touched on something really interesting there, where there's a conception, and this might be true partly, that if a person's in that state, they don't want help. But let me share a story is that, and I'm not going to mention a lot of the details, but there are many stories where individuals are on their way to attempt to end their life. They're actually engaging with people. They're actually engaging in small talk. Why? In hopes that anyone at all would ask them how they're doing.
It's a small cry for help.
Exactly. So in fact, what we call it, and some of the training is, these little engagements are actually invitations for people to ask. Because remember, most of the people who die by suicide don't want to die. They're looking for any reason to continue living.
Of course.
And so they're engaging in a little bit. Now, our job is to overcome the discomfort and simply ask.
But when do you know when not to push it? Because at that time, I think, you know, one would be in a fragile moment, and then you just don't know what kind of words that kind of like would tick them.
You don't want to trigger anything, right?
You know, to, for them to like jump into, you know, whatever they want to do.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things there. Number one, there's a booklet that I wrote and published called Indonesian Mental Health First Aid Booklet that addresses this specifically. And number two, we have to recognize that asking someone about suicide doesn't increase their risk of suicide. So the research definitively shows that we're afraid, oh, I don't want to give them ideas.
That's what you would think.
That's what we think. But the research is very clear that asking someone about suicide and even asking them several times doesn't increase the risk of suicide. And so that's why we're thinking, oh, we don't want to put ideas in their head. We won't. And in fact, we don't want to regret not asking. So let's pretend that this is a scenario, and then I'm talking to you, and then I see that you're incredibly distressed, and I'm thinking, hey, Caroline, I want to ask you something personal and absolutely no pressure. But have you ever had thoughts of ending your life? Now, it's important that we use the words, that we don't skirt around it.
Right.
That we don't use these vague terms. Why? Because if I'm asking you and I'm afraid to use those words, it's going to make you think that, oh, this person is still stigmatizing and tabooed against it, and you're not going to share it.
Right. So you're going to be transparent and direct.
So I have to show you that I'm comfortable in stewarding and caring for the feelings that you might want to share with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a bit counterintuitive if you think about it, but that makes sense. That makes complete sense if you think about it. Now,
absolutely.
There's many reasons why, and this could, I want to touch a little bit upon causes of suicide. Sometimes it's based on what happens in a person's life, and this can be different from different age groups. For example, we're hearing a lot of cases of bullying taking place in schools, whereas sometimes in that commercial I mentioned, the two football fans were actually elderly. They were quite older gentlemen. And different people could have different reasons at different stages in their lives. So is there a screening approach for causes of suicide based on their age groups? How does it work out?
Yeah, so there's two things there. One is the age group and the potential reasons. The second is the screening bit.
Okay.
So in terms of age group, one thing that I can say is that distress, anything that can trigger distress, could potentially lead to suicide, no matter how small the chance is. In fact, there's an evolutionary biology theory that says suicide is inherent in all of us. What's actually incredible is our survival mechanisms, making sure we go day by day.
Yes.
But in fact, anything that can cause distress can eventually cause suicide. So for young people, that's bullying. For people, it could be workplace stress. But when there's a sense of isolation and hopelessness and availability of the means, that's when a person is really at risk. In fact, if you look at a paper that we published this year, when we look at terms of volume, the estimated volumes for suicide in Indonesia, it's highest amongst teens and young adults. But when you look at the population rate per capita, it's highest in almost every country for people above 60.
Above 60. Okay.
Exactly, and they're a neglected age group.
Right.
And we often think about the young people, which are important because volumes are quite high. But when it comes to per capita, the highest suicide rate is amongst older people. So we have to make sure that we accompany them, that they're not lonely. We don't forget them as well. But you touched on screening, and this is an interesting thing because when we think of screening, every medically trained professional will go, we're going to screen for cancer. We're going to screen for this. We're going to screen for that. I can honestly say, and I know that this might sound a little bit odd to a lot of people listening, risk assessment doesn't work in suicide prevention. We often think about, oh, let me give you a story. So in 1983, Alexei Pokorny, he was a researcher in the US, and this has been replicated many times. He did screening for US veterans. And he said, you know what, these are all the supporting, the protective factors. You have community, you have family, you have finances, all the things that can really help you in this time. And then there are people that have high risk factors. So behaviors and certain factors that might make you in a high-risk group. And so what he did was, all right, let's put everyone in either a high-risk group or a low-risk group. Did you know that over 50% of the people who went on to die by suicide were in the low-risk group? It fluctuates so quickly that any attempt of assessing risk, any attempt of trying to guess whether this person is a high risk or not, it's just simply not going to work. Which is why we always have to be alert. That's why when people go to hospitals and people go to psychologists, we can't say, this person has a history of suicidality, therefore we need to keep close attention to them. This person looks fine. It could be that this person is the one that ends up dying by suicide.
I mean, this is a very scary moment because we never know the person that's, right now standing, beside us could be the person that is on a lifeline. That
so weird
really
too, because all three of us are into sports and we're into statistics, and statistics don't mean a thing in this case.
I mean, we also have a data right here from CEO World and National Criminal Information Center from the Indonesian National Police, where our suicide rate is quite low at 2.4 per 100,000 people. I don't know if you said that it's low, please share with us. But what's your take on this figure? Do you think there are some suicide cases that is not reported, hence that's why we're, it seems that it's a very low kind of rate on this?
Absolutely. So when it comes to suicide data, there are two authoritative sources worldwide. The first one is the WHO Global Health Observatory, or the Global Health Estimates, the GHE, or what we call the IHME Global Burden of Disease Estimates. Now, both would suggest it's a little bit low, but the police data is actually lower than that. Now, are there cases that I believe are underreported? Absolutely. Yes. So there's this one term, for those of you who are watching who may not be familiar, that we use in Indonesia called aib. Which is a deep, intense shame. It goes beyond shame in so many different degrees. And in fact, there's a term called aib keluarga, the shame of the family. And so in Indonesia, not only is a person who dies by or attempts by suicide considered shameful, considered weak, but also considered lacking of faith. We know that for a lot of the major religions in the country, primarily the Abrahamic religions, we consider suicide as something that's incredibly taboo. And as a result, what we've seen in our investigation is that families will pay hospitals who work together with the policemen to be able to conceal a suicide as much as possible. And so absolutely, there's underreported. So a paper that we published seems to estimate that at about 857% underreporting, which is the highest underreporting rate in the world. And so we have to work out how do we get accurate data? Because if we don't have accurate suicide data, any case for a national strategy or intervention is fundamentally compromised and flawed. So we have to work on the data first.
Okay. So speaking of research and prevention following that, tell us about this ongoing project between the Health Ministry and World Health Organization, and what prevention strategies, if any, and what institutions would be involved focusing on this particular issue.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of things going on, and we do need a lot more research. Number one is the most effective way to prevent suicide, and this might blow your minds, the whole literature, the most effective way to prevent suicide is to take away the method. It's not counseling, it's not pharmacological adjuncts, it's not a lifeline. In fact, what the research says, there's no good evidence to suggest that a hotline prevents suicide in the country.
And we see a lot of that, by the way.
Exactly. But rather, it's restricting lethal means of suicide, that we keep the person safe enough to be able to intervene and help them. So we're working together with University of Edinburgh to be able to reduce some of the prevalent means. I'm not going to mention what they are, but to reduce some of the prevalent means in Indonesia. We're working together, funded by a funder based in the Bahamas, to actually develop mental health first aid, including responding to suicidality for religious leaders. Because we have far more religious leaders than we do psychologists or psychiatrists, and they're much more trusted in the community. And so we're also working together on many different fronts, including actually establishing a suicide registry, working together with the Ministry of Health, as was indicated in the last presidential decree on the legislation that was passed last year, that we are going to have a suicide registry. That's something we've been advocating for a long time. And last but not least, we're working together with MNT University to be able to develop guidelines on how can we make sure that suicides are reported in an ethical way that doesn't cause other people to then die by suicide, basically in the media. So we've got an institution called Wellspring Center, or Wellspring Indonesia, where we are not only a clinic, but we also do research from there.
Amazing. Wow. I think, just like when it comes to anything else, research and more research is needed in order for us to have a better understanding, because how can you tackle something if you don't fully understand it?
Exactly.
Amazing stuff, what you guys are doing. Keep it up, and we hope to see more progression, obviously, on this very important and prevalent issue, I believe, especially in this day and age.
And we'll definitely going to invite you again for the next update in regards to this.
Perhaps for sports talk, basketball.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sandy, for this.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're taking a short break right now. When we return, we'll have many more updates and also news right here from the C Morning Show. Don't go anywhere.